PaperX are Valorant's most fun team to watch. They can destroy any opponent with a high progressive playstyle, insane mechanics, and crazy agent picks, and they're a mainstay on the international stage, qualifying to every global VCT event for the last 3 years. Except that streak has just been broken. PaperX were destroyed by DFM 2-0 with a 13-1 loss on Pearl to be eliminated in 8th place from the Pacific Kickoff Tournament, missing out on the upcoming Masters Bangkok. Their qualifying streak of 9 international events in a row, which is the most of any team in the world, was tragically broken. But this game was not just a freak upset loss. PaperX's international streak has covered up a gradual decline, and today we'll look at everything that led up to the complete collapse of Valorant's most loved team. If you enjoy this type of content, please do consider subscribing. You won't find as well-researched VCT story content like this anywhere on the internet. Plus, it's free and you can always change your mind. The story starts after the upper final of Champions 2023, when PaperX were probably the best team in the world. PaperX had just beaten EG with a miraculous comeback on Map 3 to secure a spot in the grand finals of the biggest tournament of the year. This win also guaranteed them a double map ban advantage in the final, making them the favourites to take the championship. And to top it all off, they'd made it here while playing their signature style: crazy comps, high progression, and hero plays on every map. But there was a problem. They'd been here before. Because in the previous season at Masters Copenhagen, PaperX had done exactly the same thing, qualifying to the grand final with a 2-map ban advantage. But even with that huge advantage, they didn't manage to win, losing a tragic map 5 against FPX to place second. They desperately wanted to prevent the same from happening against EG, especially because this time it was a Champions Trophy on the line. But to add to the pressure, this was also Jing's last ever match for PaperX, at least for a few years, because he had to complete his mandatory Singaporean military service. Winning a championship in his final game and securing the first ever global Valorant trophy for an Asian team was the poetic end that this team deserved. But they still had to actually win it. They took to the stage against EG for the biggest match of their careers and crumbled. They didn't play like themselves at all. The pressure on their shoulders crushed their confidence-based style of play, and when they did go for hero plays, they just looked desperate. They managed to take 1 map against EG in the final before losing 3, and they surrendered the Champions Trophy to the North American squad. It was a tragic end to Jing's time at PaperX, choking a grand final for the 2nd time, and in the process, becoming the first team to do so in Valorant history. But PaperX had to move on, and so for the 2024 season, they said goodbye to Jing and welcomed in Monyet. Monyet was coming from an incredibly promising season on GE, and he was a super flexible player who could not only replace Jing's Raze, but also play smokes in any double controller comps. He definitely wasn't as good as Jing, but it was a promising move for the future of the team. And so they came into the 2024 season as favourites for the Pacific Kickoff title, and even though they lost the final to a surprisingly good Gen G team, they still easily qualified to Masters Madrid. But once they arrived in Spain, their first match was against EDG, and PaperX didn't look comfortable at all. Forsaken was really the only one doing anything in this match, including the classic 1v5.
Up Forsaken, good for 2, maybe more to be found, but nobody low. He's 90 HP, finding another 3 health, 5 for Forsaken!
But they still couldn't win the series and went down 0-1. Their next match was against Team Heretics and the Spanish home crowd, and after looking down and out after the first few rounds of Split, they managed to bring it back and stay in the tournament.
Experience at this wider stage, it could all just tumble and collapse. Dash now available, re-swings into it, the nail in the coffin. One after the time, the hammer swings down and out onto the anvil. And there is no hope, no chance in hell. They have gone home entirely. PaperX eliminating the Spanish favourites.
Carmine Corps were their last opponents in the Swiss stage, and this game decided who would make it through to the playoffs.
Yeah, you're going to be put to test, put to task. Oh, that's rough. Blinded, and Monye just popping off. Yeah, farm him up. Even spotting the right there. Over towards Shybox, this guy's on for it. He's absolutely on the money today.
It was another extremely close affair, but PaperX managed to pull through and survive once again, eliminating both EMEA teams from Madrid. But while PaperX had struggled through the gauntlet, Gen G had qualified cleanly into the playoffs with a 2-0 record. With PaperX being the best team in Pacific for so long, the possibility that their crown might be slipping away was very real, and the first match of the playoffs would see them go head-to-head to fight for the title. But there wasn't much of a fight from the side of PaperX. Gen G's blend of aggressive and patient play overcame PaperX for the 2nd time. PaperX's next match was against Loud, who they managed to take down.
Deny this one, not half! Running him down! Mind freak!
But they fell to eventual winners Sentinels in the lower final to finish Masters Madrid in 3rd place. All things considered, 3rd place was a really solid result for PaperX. Monyet was looking great throughout the tournament, finally being considered a good replacement for Jing, and his flexibility meant that PaperX could experiment with loads of different agent comps. It seemed like his addition would really allow them to evolve as a team. But he never played for PaperX again. It turns out Jing had a medical condition which meant he was exempt from military service, and so he would be returning for VCT Pacific Stage 1. The roster would return to the team who had reached 2nd at Champions, and PaperX had got one of their superstars back. It was exciting for PaperX fans who missed Jing, but also unfortunate for Monyet, who had really found his groove within the team during Madrid. The old gang was all back together again, and ready to dominate Pacific to take back the crown from Gen G. And that's exactly what they did. They only lost one match during the entire split, with a flawless playoff run that saw them take down Gen G in the finals. They qualified to Masters Shanghai as the 1st seed, looking incredible. They were back. It looked like everything had lined up at the perfect time for them to challenge for another international trophy, and many were calling PaperX the favourites for the tournament. But then they made one of the most confusing decisions that I've ever seen in Pro Valorant. So in Masters Shanghai, the 1st seeds of each region qualified directly to the playoffs, and they got to choose their opponents for the 1st round out of the teams that came out of the Swiss stage. They could pick out of Gen G and G2, who both went 2-0, and Heretics and Foot, who both went 2-1. Don't get me wrong, none of those teams are easy to beat, but for whoever got the 1st pick, it was a pretty easy choice. Foot had looked like the least consistent team out of them and were probably the worst team in the playoffs, and Heretics were playing with a substitute, so were another decent choice. So when PaperX got the lucky draw and were allowed to pick 1st, it seemed clear who they'd pick.
Josh, please step forward right now and take your pick. Who will you be choosing as your opponent at playoffs?
Gen G?
Oh, he has chosen G2.
What? G2 not only went 2-0 in the Swiss stage, but were also known for a slow, methodical style that dealt well with aggression. Basically PaperX's complete counter. It was a really odd choice, and 100 Thieves capitalised on it by picking Foot straight after. But PaperX must have had a reason for that pick, right? And after the first half of Split, it looked like they made the right decision. They went up 11-0 and bulldozed the patient playstyle of G2. But as the match continued, they started to falter, and G2's playstyle paid off.
Working, and they're getting aggressive again. They're going to use the Cove and a bunch of flashes, but they're ready. They're playing Anthem.
Finds an opener once again! Just throw whatever you have at me! I will bear through it! I will shut you down!
Eventually taking the game 2-1, destroying PaperX on Bind. It seemed like their confidence from being labelled the favourites for the tournament was completely torn down, and they were brought very quickly back down to reality. PaperX were instantly sent down to the lower bracket up against EDG, but luckily for PaperX, EDG were having their own issues. PaperX dealt with them and moved on to the top 6, and into a match against America's 1st seed, 100 Thieves. If I only showed you the start of rounds during PaperX versus 100 Thieves on Icebox, you'd probably think that PaperX absolutely destroyed them. Except they didn't. This game had some of the worst throwing and player advantages we had ever seen from PaperX.
Spotting him out, has to tuck back. They reswing, they line up! Arsenal collects them both!
We knew that discipline wasn't their strong suit, but there was no way this game should have ever even got close to overtime. And yet, it did.
Headshot across, Jing, taking down Mind Freak, playing crouch, they readjust, but they line up! The Colette! The knives! And the man advantage! His 100 Thieves are stealing this round away. Looking for the headshot, can't make it happen. Something with a counter spray, picks up a 3rd, his own knife's pulled. Bang alone to try to clutch this. The wall raised, the push forward, the shots connecting, he's down to 81. He reads the push forward. With Devi, now noted, just playing here against time. Up on top of the rope! Bang! He gets the headshot, but does he have the time? So very close, a nail bite finisher, but he's just got it! Oh.
PaperX were eliminated from Masters Shanghai in 6th place, despite the community thinking that they should have won the entire thing. This was the earliest international exit for PaperX since lock-in, and it made everything wrong with the team very clear. A complete lack of discipline had directly cost them match wins, and if they ever wanted to reach the heights of Champs 2023 again, they would have to find some discipline from somewhere. But at least they were still dominating in Pacific. They went 5-0 in the Stage 2 regular season, and even though they lost to Gen G and got reverse swept by DRX in the playoffs to finish 3rd, they still locked in a spot at Champions. It was their lowest domestic finish since the partnership era began, but it was fine. They just bounced back at Champs, right? Well, no, actually. They were placed into a group with Foot, EDG, and G2, which some dubbed the Group of Death. G2 were their first opponents, which was a terrible matchup as we already saw in Shanghai a few months earlier, and this time was no different. G2 hard countered PaperX again and sent them down to play against Foot to try and survive in the tournament. They did win that match, but the next game was against longtime rivals EDG. Map 1 was dominant for PaperX, but if you watched the Champions Grand Finals, you'll know it was not the Pacific team who came out with the series win. EDG's mentality was way too strong, and they came back on the next 2 maps to knock PaperX out of the tournament.
And for Smoggy to be the hero his team needs in this spot to buy. Planting, Medal is used first, lowering them down, and spraying them down! Smoggy destroys the hopes and dreams of PaperX!
This was a sad fate for PaperX, especially because they were beaten by 2 extremely good teams. But it shouldn't have mattered who they played. In Champions a year prior, they would have beaten anyone in their group in a clean fashion. This version of PaperX was far away from the team that reached the Grand Finals in LA. They were behind the meta, playing old comps on almost every map, and even when they did play new comps, Jing's Neon was nowhere near good enough to challenge Kangkang's. They had a complete lack of discipline, and their mechanics weren't just better than everyone else's like they had been for the past few years. These weren't just small things going wrong, they simply were not good enough to make a deep tournament run. It was sad to watch the slow decline of the team over 2024, because we knew how good they could be. It just seemed like that version of PaperX was long in the past.
I mean, things are easy when we are winning. Like, it's easier to just brush it off and look past the small things. But when we are losing, you have to fix the problems, and it's not something easy to fix, but you have to face it.
We're having a crisis right now, so can't really tell the difference.
But before the 2025 season started, PaperX played some off-season tournaments that gave the fans some real hope. One of their biggest issues was some players' small agent pools and how that resulted in them being behind on the meta. So in these off-season tournaments, they actually tried to play some normal team comps. Jing was on Killjoy, Cypher and Deadlock, and Something was playing Sova, and they both looked good. The community was excited to see this new evolution of PaperX, and there was a strong feeling that they could get back on track in 2025. And with other Pacific teams making big roster changes, it was PaperX who assumed the role of favourites to win this year's Pacific Kickoff tournament. After all, they always finish somewhere near the top of Pacific. So how did it all go wrong this time? Their first game was against newly formed Korean super team T1, and although it was incredibly close, PaperX still lost 13-11 on the final map of Split, getting knocked down to the lower bracket. They would need to win 5 matches in a row to qualify for Bangkok, but they hadn't not qualified since 2021. It seemed obvious they would just sweep the lower bracket. It started well with an easy 2-0 against Zeta Division, but then they matched up against a revitalized DFM, who were out for blood.
Fragment to delay, pushes forward, blind through the smoke, able to find Forsaken, Spike still gets planted. But matters are only getting worse for PaperX. Something able to find one, then taken down. Mind Freak Jing trying to desperately to fight back, but the judge aforementioned will be the thing that seals their fate. 13-1, where were you? DFM have eliminated PaperX from kickoff. They will not be going forward to play Genji. They will not be going to Bangkok.
They were utterly destroyed. 2-0, 13-1 on the final map, looking completely lost. It was devastating. The 9-event long streak of qualifying to international events had been emphatically broken by the worst performing org throughout VCT history, no less. They'd been hiding behind incredible mechanics and nostalgic comps for a while, but now it's clear for all to see. PaperX are not a top team anymore. So what are the problems? The most obvious thing to point to is the team's complete lack of discipline. Throwing advantages by overpeaking is such a feature of PaperX at this point that if you don't see them throw away multiple 1vx or 2vx situations in a game, you start to wonder if you're actually watching the right team. Another defining characteristic of PaperX is their crazy agent comps, but the innovations they had back in 2022 and 2023 have drastically slowed down and become much less effective. They're playing old comps that teams know and can easily anti-strat. Just look at their Pearl comp, which they lost to DFM with. They've been playing that since the start of 2023. This kickoff's meta was defined by Taeho and Vice, but PaperX didn't really bother to lean into that too much. Even after winning with Taeho on Fracture against T1, they just switched back to a comfort comp from 2023 against Zeta. Something in Jing's limited agent pools really stopped them from following the meta very closely, at least the current meta, and they end up forcing Jet and Raze a lot when not doing that might be better. And throughout 2024, we saw the choking narrative arise again and again. The lack of a traditional IGL has given PaperX a real freedom over their time together, but maybe it leads to them easily crumbling in the big moments. Overall, the game has moved on and PaperX hasn't. But it's not all over. One of the most important aspects of PaperX's success in Valorant has been their incredible management. We can see it with the great jerseys, content, marketing, and roster decisions they've made in the past. Look, I'm not saying that because they have cool jerseys they're going to become good again, but I do think the org is in good hands. Teams change and evolve with roster changes over time, but if the management stays the same, and if PaperX is as well run as we think, they will make the right decisions above board. The question now is whether a roster change is needed, or whether the team can be saved in its current state, but that's up to the org to decide. It's easy to point out individual issues and say, fix this, fix that, or cut this player, but this team has been together for so long that these systems are completely ingrained, and they do have such a strong bond. I really believe that these 5 players can reach the same heights of Masters Copenhagen and Champions LA once again, but it will take some real shifts in their mindset and some fundamental differences in approach to adapt to Valorant in 2025. I don't know what will happen to PaperX in the future, but I do know that the entire community would absolutely love to see them thriving on the international stage once again. They're Valorant's most loved team for a reason. And with that, I've been Commend, subscribe if you enjoyed, and thank you for watching.